Welcome to the Nickolas and Natali Show. Today on the podcast, guests John Fyne and Alan Long. That's right, 2-for-1 special. I'm just going to go ahead and the episode speaks for itself, so we're going to continue on here. This week's riddle, where do snowmen dance? Tune into the outro at the end of the episode and you can figure out where so you can go dance with them. Head on over to nickolasandtally.com/shop for the new Let's Get Yoked tank tops. For those of you who don't train legs or really train at all, go buy one and it'll make you look 3 times bigger. Leave a 5-star review, become the reviewer of the week. We're trying to get to 100 5-star reviews and fast. Please, if you like the podcast, leave a review. As always, this episode is sponsored by Little Webby LLC at littlewebby.com. Creates the best darn custom software, websites, and mobile applications. Fill out their contact form at http://littlewebby.com. You go do that, say we sent you, and you get a free 30-minute consultation to build your website. As always, I'm the intern, you're the listener, this is Nick.
Hello and welcome. This is the Nickolas and Natali Show. I am your host, Nickolas and Natali. Today we have 2 special guests, never done before on the pod, Alan and John. Season's greetings.
Hello.
We're going to start with a banging question for John that is on the top of my noggin. From my research, John, you have amazing posture. And it seems like it was that your whole life you've had good posture. How is that so?
Honestly, I think I saw it on like Princess Diaries with my sisters one time, and I was like, say no more. I'll just stand like this. This seems to be the way that everyone wants to stand for everything. So now I have perfect posture, and now I do that to everyone else. I'll be walking with my wife, and I'll just like poke the small of her back until she stands up straight. That's how I do it.
Perfect way to be health conscious, I guess. I think that's probably the best way to say it.
I think it's supposed to like help breathing or something.
Something
I'm
like that.
lying.
All right, let's dive into it. We have a I don't know what the right word is for it, but we're having a discussion on race today, and I'd like to hear from both of you about how maybe growing up, if your family had discussions about race in the household, of like just to be aware how to respond in certain social circumstances, if it was ever a topic at all.
So in my household, we never like sat around and had dinner and talked about race. I mean, we sat around and had dinner together, but as far as the topic of race, it never really was discussed. I think more so, especially for like a young Black male, where I grew up. So just like a little history behind me. So here in Riverside, I grew up in an area, it's known as Casablanca, the White House. And so it's not known to be the best of areas. In fact, probably like not the best area in Riverside. And so it's a high police presence. There's police around all the time, and it's mainly a high population of Hispanic, and then the next is probably Black. And then you'd be hard pressed to find anybody of any other race, white, Asian, or anything like that. But there were some. And so I learned most of it just like by friends and being out with friends and what they knew about race. And so mostly those were my discussions. And it really wasn't a discussion. It was just something that you learned when you interacted with. This is how you respond and, behave in certain situations. And it's more so I observed it more than an outright discussion. So it was more kind of you just lived it basically. And that's like a broad answer I could give.
Yeah, kind of similar story for me. We didn't really do like discussions in my house for things. Like it wasn't like a let's sit down and talk about race. It was mostly like Alan said, I experienced some of it, and then my mom might like hit me with a couple like, hey, don't do this when you go over to their house, or hey, watch out for this, or hey, don't be out too late. You never know this. So it wasn't so much like let me sit down and discuss, what is race and how is it diverse. It was more of like a hey, just keep this in mind for yourself. To the point where I didn't know that like other people of other races weren't having that discussion. So yeah, I didn't realize how specific it was until later.
Got it. I think so. Something that inspired me to ask that question was, of course, the internet is the source of all information, but I saw a video where it was saying how like in black families the parents are having to tell their children how to interact with the law enforcement all the time. Um, so that's where I guess my discussion part was coming from, and I'm curious on like more of the experience side of what you guys are talking about. So like, which experiences growing up were the most telling or learning for you?
I didn't I never really realized this stuff until like way too late, like
Mm.
out like college, really, when I started to like actually think about it. But like I did have a run-in with the police when I was a kid. There was someone apparently throwing rocks off an overpass,
Wow.
and yeah, they said it was like some young-looking person, and I just happened to be like standing in front of my neighborhood at that
Hmm.
point. I was outside, and like the cop comes and like stops for me and starts like talking to me, and he tells me what's going on, and I was like, oh, but I remember he told me the description for the kid, and I wasn't wearing like any of it. Like he was like, oh, it's a kid wearing a blue striped shirt, and I'm wearing a solid colored like orange shirt, and it's
Yeah.
just like definitely not me at all. But like he happens to just stay there for a while and keeps like pestering me with, you know how dangerous it is to throw rocks off. I'm like, I'm aware. That's why I would never do this. You know what I mean? Like you're correct. I agree. But like, yeah, that was like one of the first times I remember of like being of interacting with police in a way where like I didn't realize it then, but I was uncomfortable with the guy
Mm.
talking to me, even though back then I had like no problem with police. Um, but I still was just really uncomfortable because you had two police guys just like phalanxing me in my neighborhood. Where do you live? I live right here. What's your address? It's this. You sure you live there? Yes, I live here. Like that kind of stuff.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah, for me, it was more like we were saying before. It's kind of like you lived it, and it really wasn't like an outright conversation, but through little things here, little things there that are said. As far as and it was very clear, like black people, white people was always a conversation of black people and white people, and so the comments that were made usually were not because there's any white person that is coming to our house or any white person that we know. It's like you see some kind of thing on TV and it's excuses, oh, that's how white people are. Or, and it's never an outright like, not because we necessarily know a white person, because I didn't really see many white people unless I went to school. But when I went home, it's black and brown, and that was it. And so it's usually in a form of like some kind of subtle joke. It's kind of like matter of factly, like, well, that's white people that they have money. It's always the issue of that's just the way it is, and there's no reason to question it. There's no reason to um, you know even see it as problematic. It's just that that's the way it's always been. And so white people live on this side of town and black people live on this side of town. And black people know how to dance because we just know how to dance, and white people they just don't know how to dance. And it sounds funny, but like as a kid you learn it, and then it's just like that's
Yeah.
just it is. And then so you get older, and then it's just like, well, that's the way it is, and that's and I'm sure we'll get more into that discussion later, but those are some of the negative. As a kid it's innocent, it's just something that you learn, but as an adult
Yeah.
when you have a chance to reflect you're like, that was kind of like sick. It's bad.
Yeah.
And I don't mean sick in a good way, I mean sick as, yeah.
Let's do it. Let's take it there then. How do we post? I mean, we'll flip back and forth. How do we post childhood of taking in a specific narrative? When and how are we gonna decipher those and break those down? At what point were you like, well, maybe I should like question some of these things? Because I agree with the sentiment that like I've almost found that adulthood is basically processing your childhood. That's like almost all I've really experienced
Yeah.
adulthood to be like, why am I this way? Why am I believing these things? Um, so with your experience with this, like white people are this way, black people are this way, how did you start taking the narrative and ciphering through it?
Man, that's such a good question. And although like I listen to a lot of hip hop, so get ready for like hip hop,
Yeah, okay, let's do it.
So there's a rapper. His name's Brother Ali. He has a unique story. He's actually white and he's almost blind and he's a Muslim. So
Wow.
I'll put that out there. And I think his wife is black. So there's a lot going on in his life. But and one of the songs that he raps, and I'll throw this. I don't know who's going to be listening to this, but definitely a song that everybody should listen to. But especially if you're white listening to this, it's a song called "Before They Called You White," and so he breaks down this idea of what whiteness is and how people attach themselves to whiteness. But in the song, he talks about an eye can't see itself, or an eye can. So someone can't critique themselves or know they're in the wrong until they have somebody there to challenge them. And that's the hard part, because most people won't be able to do that unless they have someone come and challenge their beliefs. And I think that's the reason, we're seeing a little bit of a change right now, is even if it's like a joke, like, oh, John, you must love fried chicken, and it's funny and all, but like, and I won't bring up anybody's name. So when I speak to people in my personal life, I'll just say I just know someone or someone in my family. But I work with someone who brought that to my attention. It's just like, no, if somebody's making a joke like that, whether they're your friend or not, like let's get it established that not all black people like fried chicken, because some people may internalize that and be like, well, all black people must love fried chicken. And it sounds crazy, but especially kids, they hear these things.
Bring him back, Alan. Don't do it to us.
I guess I'll go until he comes back, and then he can just cut me off.
He can
That's
finish
fine.
his thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like the question is basically like, when did you start discovering that you were of a race, and kind of recontextualizing past experiences? Is that basically what you were asking?
Yeah.
A lot of it was through conversation with my sister Yvonne, because she started this process a lot earlier than I did. Well, she's older, but also like she started it earlier than I did, and like it was just kind of like she had a lot of like, at the time it seemed aggressive conversations with me about who I was, who I'm hanging out with, what I'm saying, what I'm accepting, and it was really blunt. And for a while I was kind of running from it until I kind of just took the time to I asked for some articles, she sent some articles, and I just kind of began reading. And it wasn't like I read one article and I'm like, oh yeah, no, they're right. It was just more of a consistent, like, I read something in an article and then like somehow it applies directly to my life. And or I read like a passage from a book and it's like somehow that applies directly to my life, and it kind of just creates this domino effect of like, well, what else happened to me? Oh, this happened to that person too. Like I'm reading a book right now by a woman named Austin, and she's kind of like giving an account of her life. And as she's describing her upbringing, I'm like, oh, sure, I did the exact same thing, and that kind of creates this amount of reflection in me where I'm like, okay, well, dang, if I relate this much to what they're talking about, let's one, see what else they're talking about, and two, how much more could I relate with, and as it continues to be this almost universal experience, it creates this amount of like legitimacy in my brain, and it lends itself to like further exploration. Alan was just here. I saw him.
Alan is popping in and out. He'll make it back in.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. What age do you think that was at, and how did it change the way you acted moving forward?
I was like entering college, moving. I think. I mean, so obviously, again, I'm entering college now, or mid college around there, and it didn't do too much in the day to day, as in like I already had my mannerisms and everything. Most of what it changed was how much, for an example, was like how much I actively looked for, like a black creator of whatever I'm looking for. You know what I mean? Or seeking out company in the form of black people, because I grew up in mostly white spaces. It was kind of like the norm for me was, oh, somewhere I'm going is going to have a lot of white people, so it's like I almost looked for that at that point, where after I kind of started figuring that stuff out, I was like, no, I got to make sure I reinvest myself, not like exclusively out of white spaces and into black spaces, but like make more of an effort to enter black spaces or just to understand more. So like around college is when I started, looking at, like, if I'm reading a comic, I look up, black comic book artists or comic book writers, and if I'm looking up, photos, I look for like black photographers and stuff like that.
So your experience would be more so you're trying to connect with the black community because you
Right.
grew up without as much of it. When you were reading those articles, were you being informed in a way of like, okay, these are the things I have to change, or was there any anger? What articles are we referring to? What type of education in this?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Because like it really was, I was really combative at the start of it because it all sounded like I was wrong all the time. Like, oh, you should be doing this, or the way you're living life, it's wrong, or what you're thinking about this, it's wrong. It all sounds like really, what's the word I'm looking for? It sounds like it's blaming me for a lot of stuff and it's holding me accountable for things that I thought I was like outside of my control. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how it would seem because it's really uncomfortable and it's really different. It's a much different concept because the norm, again, like for my life, was being in these spaces and people in those spaces seemed to be nice to me and accept me and everything. And I think the fair majority definitely were, but I did still have a lot of understanding to do as far as like black people. So, for example, I didn't realize. Like, okay, I'll give you an example of like I'm reading a review of Wonder Woman, and it's by a black movie reviewer, and they're kind of like criticizing the movie for how it portrayed black people at the beginning of it. Not even heavily, but again, I read that and I go like, oh, what are you complaining about now? You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, come on,
Mm-hmm.
Wonder Woman was great. Nothing's wrong with it, and it was, but I was reading it to my sister, to try and do like a see, this person's wrong, and she's like explaining it to me like, no, what you're not getting is, X, Y, and Z aspects of this article. And it was moments like that where I had to kind of like move beyond the initial jarring effects of hearing that what I thought was wrong and kind of continue looking into it. Like there is this surface level of like, yeah, this seems like aggressive language, but then there is what's underneath it, which is everything that's led up to that aggressive language and everything that it actually means, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I had to learn to not like run away at the sight of critique that sounds mean, and kind of like dive deeper because in reality the person was in a way sticking up for black people, including me,
Mm-hmm.
by taking Wonder Woman to task about something, you know.
So it's almost like always seeing that there is a dog in the fight in regards to like representation. Is that
Yeah,
would that be the main?
yeah. I mean, it was mostly about how, even for me, someone who would technically be a far more inside the topic than a white reader of the article, it's still important that I don't allow status quo to keep me
Mm.
from learning about it as well. You know what I mean? Because my immediate reaction again was to get defensive and get hurt versus like just sit, let them say their thing, and then kind of try and understand what they're trying to say and where they're coming from.
Got it. Okay, that now it's all hitting me. Okay, and that seems like almost the response we should give for most things now,
Mhm.
really, in especially in this entire debate our nation seems to be going through is like
Right.
instead of taking the approach of like ugh, the divisiveness of like whatever this person says is wrong and whatever I'm saying is probably right. And my example
Yeah.
of this that I've been contemplating a little bit is I've been seeing social media posts that say like before I even start, you can go ahead and unfollow me if you think blah blah blah. And my thought is like the people that are going to unfollow you or block you or whatever you're saying, those are probably the people that need to be part of the discussion, right? Like that need to
Mm.
be in the know of the understanding. Don't push them out. don't push them away. They probably need to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, I broke out. I don't. What was the question?
I think this question is like um, is basically like, what do we think about like current landscape as far as um, how there's ways to approach people who just might be on different wavelengths about something. Is that kind of what you're
Mm.
getting at?
Pretty much.
Yeah. As for, okay, so I say this to everyone like that I talk this about, like it's or talk about this too, whatever. Um, I'm like fairly new to this entire topic, you know, so I just happen to have a lot more patience than others who are, veterans of the discussion, who have been saying this for years or decades or however long. So like, yeah, to me, like I have plenty of time and plenty of patience to sit with anyone who asks me a question or who misunderstands me or misunderstands the movement. Um, and while I would prefer if everyone was able to sit down, there is a point though with people where uh, some questions you just can't keep answering, and so it's like when there's people that I feel have gotten to the point, and I can kind of defend it, where it's like they're just tired of having to talk about it. You know what I mean? So that kind of person would post something that says like, "Oh, if you still don't believe Black Lives Matter, don't follow me." You know what I mean? Like that dismissal, it isn't so much like I don't want to teach you. It's I've been trying. You don't want to listen. It is what it is. You know what I mean?
Almost like
And
acceptance.
right, and it's not perfect, you know what I mean, but it is kind of like the reality of the situation, where it's like, there's at some point it's just someone has to be done, and it's not even like they're leaving them out in the cold. There's no drought of information or
Yeah.
in this topic, nor is there like a lack of accessibility. It's like if it's not going to come from that person, but it's a cursory Google search will get you the information that you need.
My biggest fear is that those type of people, they
Hmm.
won't do the Google search, and that person might be the
Mm.
only person in their life that like they
Right.
have any sort of connection to with this thing. But that makes a lot of sense, and I did not even consider that they could be at a point of just accepting it. Like the amount of frustration in those posts are probably well beyond of what I'm even aware of. So let's dive into the Black Lives Matter movement in general. I kind I think I would like to define what it is at the start of it. So if either of you want to define what the Black Lives Matter movement is, and then we can go from there.
Black Lives Matter. I mean, I want to say, as far as like Black Lives Matter, the movement, and Black Lives Matter, like as an organization, because I think a lot of people will take the two entities and as they should. I mean, if you say Black Lives Matter, I could see how someone says you support, everything that they stand by. But the movement as a whole, if I had to define it, would just be a progressive movement to try to get our country to look at how we look at race and interact with one another and try to reconcile that's like a big word right now, reconcile the past trauma that has been, you know that has happened due to slavery, due to Jim Crow laws, due to redlining. So the past trauma that our country has gone through, and just to look at those things and look at our current laws and look at our current ways that we do things, and try to make it better in a broad sense. If I don't know if that's like a good answer. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just Black lives, but that's what we're focused on right now is Black lives. But I mean, our country has a long way to go, to make it great, to make it what it was founded on. And no country is perfect. I believe we live in like the greatest country, you know, in the world right now. But there's definitely some things, some flaws. And why not, while we're here, try to make it better?
Yeah, heck yeah.
I don't know if you have anything to add to that, John.
No, yeah, no, I don't have anything to add to that. But that I do like that point of like, yes, it's a movement focused on Black people, but the concepts that it's promoting would be beneficial for everyone. You know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's nothing new. I mean, it's new to us, but our fathers and mothers and grandmothers have seen it, and the civil rights movement, the poor people's movement.
Mhm.
It's taken different forms, and that's one thing that's scary is people are behaving as if it's new, And John, you and I talked about that before. Like, go read a history book
Right.
and see there's moments in our in our history where these things have popped up, and people are acting as if people have never protested.
Right.
People have never like looked out for the rights of other people.
Right. Exactly. No, yeah, it's really that's really interesting. Just because the protest pops up, and I almost like set a clock by it. I was like, yeah, someone's gonna throw a rock at some point. We know this. What I mean? Like someone's gonna throw a bottle. But that shouldn't be the surprise. So like I was like, but it's gonna happen, and what's gonna happen is the second someone throws a rock or shatters a window, that's gonna be the news. And that kind of happened exactly almost. But yeah, no, I agree with everything Alan said.
Literally,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly how it happened. Let's touch on that then too. What would you say then? So let's say somebody who has only been consuming the news and seeing, oh my gosh, people are looting and somebody threw a rock and all of those things. What would you say to somebody that says, I don't want to say is trying to like undermine what the protests are doing, but just they're hyper focused about these looting events?
Yeah, so I mean, even before George Floyd, before Ahmaud Arbery, I was always that person at a dinner. What about our president? What about, and I'll always bring up slavery. Here we go. This black guy's talking about slavery again. And so like for right now, I'm loving it. I jump at the chance to go meet with people because I love talking about this stuff. And so one thing that I would say, and that I have been saying to people that are hyper focused on the what, and what I mean by what, I'll define the what: the looting, the protests, the tense relations between people, the Facebook posts. People are. I even heard a story. Someone in our church, two people in our church, brothers in Christ, arguing over Facebook. So focused, so focused on the what. Let's look past the what of these things. And I know it's a bad thing. The protests, the looting. Well, I don't want to say the protests are bad, but the looting, I don't agree with. But this is more of the what, and let's start taking a look at the why.
Yeah.
And so when we look at the why, I think more progress will be made, because if we're so focused on material things, and I don't want to make light of people's businesses that are being burned down, people's in some cases homes and things being stolen. Um, but in the grand scheme, the macro version of this, like I pray to God that all of that was insured, but that's for another conversation. When we look at why people feel like they have to go out into the streets and throw things at cops and hold up a sign to be heard, why somebody feels like they have to go and break into a store and steal something to be heard, or if they feel like they need those things to survive, I think that's what we need to be focused on. And in America, we're always focused on the what. And that's what we're built on the what. We're built on the bottom line. How do we make a profit? So I don't blame people for being focused on that, but I just want people to understand, like, let's look at the bigger picture and the why. I always say, like, it seems like we are good at, treating bullet hole wounds with band-aids. And I heard that, and I steal that. I heard it from someone. It makes me sound super enlightened, but that's what we're good. That's what we're good at in America. It's just like, throw a band-aid on it and then keep it moving. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You're tough. Let's get through it and do well. But I don't think we're good at like relationships. I don't think we're that good at relationships here in America, and that's me too. I don't want to speak from a soapbox because I'm thrown in that too, but I recognize that, and I want to work on that. So more focus on the why, and I don't have the all answers as to why, but yeah, the what can be replaced and fixed, but the why, that's where we start getting into some
weeds,
real healing.
Some tweets. Yeah, I mean, I think that's obviously very true. I think another component of it is it's a lot easier to dismiss something if it seems evil, if it seems wrong. So you have all the protests. You have a ton of peaceful protests still going on right now. Um, and instead, like, again, I've had these conversations too, where it's like people just want to say, yeah, protests are fine, but these riots, though, and it's like I
Yeah.
feel like it's a really useful way, and that's why I said before, I'm like, wait till someone throws a rock, right? Someone's gonna throw a rock, and we're gonna talk about just the protest, is because it's a really useful and easy way to sidestep the point of the conversation. It's like someone who argues on how you said something versus what you're saying. It's like, oh, you shouldn't have swore at me. I'm like, yeah, but you did this thing to me. That's the point of what
Yeah.
we're talking about. So it's like I always saw it as like a really effective tool to ignore the main idea. Kind of like what Alan was saying. Skipping the why for the
Mm.
what. Because like again, not to again, yeah, very much not trying to trivialize people's lost businesses, but you just think about the scale of all of this. The scale of what's going on, and like there's no like it's interesting that we can like focus on writing and everything, and that seems to be eclipsing a conversation that every state in the country is trying to have. Like, it's not like there's a secret to the protest. Like, these people just want something, and instead of like talking about that, it's, hey, check this out over here. This thing's on fire, and it's like, sure, that's yeah, but
Mm.
there's like something to talk about. We can definitely there's conversations to be had about rioting and looting and everything, but that's kind of not the point, and it gets like lumped in a lot. It's like these guys want something, but they don't know how to ask for it. And it's like, that's not true. That's not true
Yeah.
at all. You're just a component of it that's easier to argue against.
Yeah, that's perfectly stated. They don't know how to ask for it. Are you even listening to the question though? Like, are you trying to answer the question that's being asked here? Um,
Yeah.
Mm.
so with the looting and the protests, I want to know, what does success look like for these protests? Like, at the end of all of this, how can we say we got what we wanted? We're at the end goal. This success metric is hit. Is it? They'll leave it there.
Um,
Ooh, that's a
I
good
think. Well,
question.
I think that I think the protests will end before like someone drapes a mission accomplished banner. And the only reason for that is because I think the goal right now, there's a few concrete things that people want, obviously, but I think this isn't gonna be solved anytime soon. I think right now what people want is progressive action, over time, whatever amount of time that is, with like actual like actionables in sequence. So, like for example, first people wanted, uh, the cop that killed um, George Floyd to be arrested, right? But technically, yeah, good job, that's done. But that's not what all people want. They also want a conviction, and that opened up an entire conversation about policing in general. So now people want um, changes to how America is policed at all. And that's not so much people just like finding new things to be upset about. It's just like people are like, okay, well, if you're listening,
Let's
this is
keep it
actually
going.
all the stuff. Yeah, this is actually all the stuff that we're trying to get done. So I think it's just kind of gonna snowball, and again, not in like a petulant, people just want to complain way, but I think there's a lot of stuff people have been asking for a long time, and it's like, well, this ain't done till we get this and this and this done. We'll take this for now. Well, we'll take the arrests for now, but this is actually what we need. You know.
Mm. That yeah, I have a lot to say about that. So there I feel like that's a good question, and it's a dangerous question. And I don't say it's a dangerous question because I don't want to answer it, but it almost implies as if like there's an end to it. And so the reason why I say that is because the level of racism and the system of racism that has been in place in our country is so that I don't think it's ever going to be finished, because I think people are hopeful, and we should be, like a light at the end of the tunnel where we're all frolicking like a Neapolitan, ice cream, and everyone's mixing. But to be honest, and I don't want to sound like cruel, I don't think that's ever going to happen in our country, and then that's okay. And I don't think everybody's okay with that yet, knowing that we're probably not going to get to that point, but it shouldn't stop us from working to that point. So one of the things that I think we can measure like some success from these protests is, and we've seen it even locally, like near here, LA, like I think it was $125 million from the police budget that was redirected to communities of color there. Now, a lot of people might say, that's nothing, but it's something, and it's a start. So things like that, like where money is being directly funneled into programs um, that help racial reconciliation. One thing for me, being a fifth grade teacher, is education reform. And so I don't know if you guys have seen, I teach fifth grade. So looking at a fifth grade history textbook, um, the issue of slavery, the issue of race is hardly touched on, if at all. It's glossed over. And so trying to get it into the textbooks, and I know the district where I work, there have been things in place where, it's a requirement, African American studies, you have to take like a certain number of units in it. And I think that's great. So like education reform, police reform, and things like that. But I think as far as like relationship buildings, I always go back to that. How we can, hire more counselors, how we can hire more community builders. And I think, I don't want to sound like this cynic or this person that makes America seem like bad, because it's great, but just focus on relationship buildings and getting back to that, because I think um, when we start losing our sense of like family, that's when a lot of these issues arise. Um, but those are like two or three things I can think of as like measuring success. And I was gonna make a joke about like reparations, but I legit think we need reparations. 40 acres in a mule. Let's go. That's my plug. But yeah, I feel like this conversation could go on for a long time, but I firmly believe in reparations, and how that would get, doled out to people. That's where it's hard, but
Yeah.
some kind of reparations, whether it's a monetary, or whether that looks like, access to college, or, things like that. But yeah.
Yeah, family for sure. All of it, everything you said. Yeah, I'm trying to take it all in.
Yeah.
But yeah, family I think is a great point too, because I think that's where it starts most of the time. Like most of our issues are stemming from how we're taught and raised on be in kind of what we were saying earlier, like these specific narratives. This is how this is, but it's really misinformation starting from when we're all children. So yeah, 100% agree with that. I want to touch on the police side of things, because we mentioned police reform. Uh,
Let's go there.
what does police reform look like realistically?
Realistic. So, because I know that's a hot button issue right now, as far as prison, or not prison reform. For prison reform, yes, but police reform and defund the police, that's like the big thing that is very divisive right now. Um, so I can only speak for me. I don't want to speak for anybody else. But when I see that defund the police, this is what I see, and I know that's where the discord comes and people are getting in fights over. When I see defund the police, I see taking some of the budget that the police have and redirecting it, whether that's to another, organization, be education, be medical, be whatever it be. um, or if not, because I think we need to open it to a discussion and not just say these are our
Yeah.
demands, because I think that's when it's gonna like rub people the wrong way, and you're not gonna get a seat at the table. um, and just taking some of that budget and maybe asking the community, because we look at Minnesota, and Minnesota like came out and they said they were going to just scrap their police force, and I think that's when people were like, "What?" And it's crazy, but it's like as a teacher, and I tell my kids right off the like from the first day, I'm not going to treat you guys equally, and I can't treat you guys equally because everyone has different needs, and there's a difference between equality and a difference between equity, and that's for another discussion. But Minnesota is, if that's what the community felt like they needed because they've been suffering, you know, maybe that's a route that they're going to go. But I hope like another city, like let's say for example Riverside, sees that and like, we need to scrap our police too. But it's just like, well, is the situation as bad, you know? And that's the hard thing, because America's so big, the United States is so big. But I believe that we still need a police force, because, you know, if I'm in trouble, I'm going to call the police. But as far as like, I don't know, we see in LA there's pictures of police cars, and they have legit, I saw this, they have Lamborghinis, they have all these things, and I'm like, what's the justification behind
Is that real?
You know? I don't know if it's real, but it looked real. So maybe I shouldn't bring that up, but like, I don't know. I see our police force here in Riverside, like brand new cars, and then I'm glad. I think they need those, but sometimes I'm just like, did you really need that? And you know, people can argue both sides of that,
Yeah.
but just taking some of the money and pump it straight into the community, because I think our laws are being, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not. They are policing us, but I don't know if that's like every community needs policing it, and sometimes we need like what's the word, like community builders instead of policing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sorry, that's kind of like a roundabout answer, but taking some of the money and just putting it other places, because I know here in California we're asking the government for money to help us with the CARES Act and all that, or you know, there's a threat of teachers losing jobs, or you know, funding being cut, and that's I would love, you know, hey, we got some extra money that we don't really use, and let's give it to you, but
Right.
you know, yeah.
I would kind of no, not even kind of, I would agree with what Alan's saying, because yeah, there's a spectrum to it where it's like defund to like abolish police, to get rid of them, Minnesota style, and like there's no more police around, and I'm not really on the abolish side at the moment, because again, yeah, to me it's an odd concept to like say let's just not have police around, but there is validity in defunding and redistributing not just budget, but you know, powers to different aspects of care. So for example, like, you know, I was reading something, someone was talking about how, as a NPR Code Switch Instagram page was saying, you know, people keep wanting to treat police like social workers, but they're really not
Mm,
equipped to do these things, you know. And so there's a ton of, you know, different types and occurrences of violent crime in this country that, when you look at it, don't really require police presence. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
that can be easily diffused by a social worker. You know what I mean? Like there's cases where, you know, you'll see like a video. There's a video like a few years ago of this guy sitting next to one of his patients, and you know, he had some sort of like mental issue going on, and they were both sitting on the sidewalk, and it was a tense situation. They were like kind of like surrounded by cops, and the social worker, this big black guy, is like there. His arms are up, and he's talking not just the guy next to him, but also the cops down. And the guy
Wow.
next to him's like
Mm,
chilling. Yeah, the guy's chilling, and everyone's like calm except for the cops. And you see that kind of scene, and you're like, technically that's under the purview of policing the way it's set up right now, but in reality the person maintaining that whole situation was the social worker. You know what I mean? He actually ended up getting shot on accident by like one of the cops
Oh
got
no.
trigger happy. that was the point. That was the point in the video. It's like he was just taking care of the guy who was freaking out, and then he
wow.
Oh
gets shot
no.
with his hands up, and then the cop was like, "Sorry," because he got like freaked out.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going, but like
Well, that proves your point. What you're talking about, John. That's what they're there. That's what they're trained to
like
do.
they don't. There's people whose entire careers are designed for de-escalation in a way that police just don't have the training for. They might like get a few weeks on it or something. I don't know how police training works, but there's people who there's people who go to like 6 years of college. You know what I mean, of higher education, entirely focused on dealing with different types of people, and those, like, if it's a call about someone who's kind of having a mental break in a non-lethal way, I don't see why it couldn't be a social worker that arrives to the scene with an ambulance. You know what I mean? And I've heard like a variation of that where it's like, yeah, they can still bring like a police officer with them, but the person leading the scene should be a social worker. You know what I mean? And I see that as entirely beneficial. So yeah, like you have these cases where, you know, noise complaint, call a cop. It's like, well, what's the police going to do? Shoot the noise? You know what I mean? Like, it's not, or arrest the noise. There's no, like, you start to think about it, you break it down, you go, like, there are plenty of nonviolent crimes that don't necessarily need police presence in that moment, And I think that's kind of at the crux of it, where it's like, yeah, so maybe there doesn't need to be as many police around as there are. We can definitely redistribute that to other facets of society that have direct training for those situations.
For sure. Yeah, that's a fantastic idea. And at the very least, if they can't quickly take a step towards something like that, the training for police officers should be, I mean, as you stated, like I really don't know what goes on in their academies, but I would imagine de-escalation should probably begin to be at the forefront of all of these interactions,
Right. Because I mean,
and what better way than education?
Yeah. Because I mean, that's really, because there is just that conflict all the time where it's their job is to kind of neutralize the threat.
A
Yeah,
threat.
like you got to neutralize a threat. So it's like, sure. So what they might see in a moment is a threat, and that needs to be like cuffed or something, or taken to the ground, or reasoned with until you can arrest it. But like, again, some of these crimes, like say someone's drunk in public intoxication. It's like, cool. Do we need to like fill prison space with this person, or can we send them home? You know what I mean? Can we like escort them home, slap them with a fine or a ticket or something? So there's some sort of consequence. But like do we need like full police presence at all times for everything?
And I think that's a good point, like bringing the community into these conversations. Because I don't know, looking at police reform, maybe the people that you're policing have a say in what they need and what they want, right? And I think that's education. There's a big push for that. What does that particular community that you're teaching need, instead of just assuming this is what they need, and then and it's a one pill serves all. But it's just like, no, every community is different, so let's bring those people in the community and see what they need instead of just assuming.
Yeah, I've been trying very hard to take the word I assume, or my assumption is, out of most conversations. Like I'm trying to be more
Objective.
just more, yeah, just kind of just more. Let me figure this out if this is true before I just start throwing things around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for the record, I don't know if those Lamborghinis are true. I apologize. I just saw that and got angry and was like, they got Lamborghinis.
That's all I need to see.
That's funny.
They got Lambos and Teslas.
Let's take this toward Christians in general. Oh, gosh. What's their role? What is the Christian's role in all of this? What should a Christian be considering during all of this, if that makes any sense?
I think there's an amount of like active involvement that you have to have as a Christian for situations like these. And that might not look the same. Like it doesn't mean like everyone's going to be at the protest, but like I think Christians, actually not modern Christians. Christians generally, there's a danger to it in that they can hide behind the concept of peacefulness as a way to justify inaction.
Mm.
You know, like, oh, I don't want to ruffle feathers because Jesus was a nice guy. You know what I mean? You know, like he was nice, a teddy bear, and so I'm gonna be that too. When in reality, one, he wasn't, and two, that's kind of not your calling. Um, and so, like, for example, I enjoy that, like, churches are speaking out, more aggressively than honestly I thought they would. But I enjoy that, but I do think, like, to nitpick, I think the conversation shouldn't be like, so how do we as Christians, like, forgive like that and forget, and how do we, like, be nice about it all the time? I think the conversation should just be really stark in churches and kind of confront this evil, you know what I mean, and in all its glory, and kind of leave it at that. Because I'll watch, like, sermons, and what'll happen is they'll mention it, and it's like great, thank you for mentioning it, and then they'll jump to now, again with the whole rioting thing. Now, should Christians be throwing rocks? And should Christians get rid of, and should Christians respect authority and all that stuff? And I'm like, cool, but I think, if you want to talk about, we can talk about cops in church and talk about all that stuff. We should, then make it a series. But I think the first thing you have to do is speak to the entirety of the toxicity, the sin that is racism. Like, speak to that, like, starkly. And I think there's a certain amount of, like, hiding behind uh, a sheepish, I guess Jesus, that allows for, like, a calm meditation and niceness of the situation.
Mm. That's a
Yeah.
good point. I was just thinking what you were saying, John, and I was reading this book from Martin Luther King, Dr. Martin Luther King, and he talks about in that book, it's called "Why We Can't Wait," um, and he talks about the white moderate, like in the North, and he says, like, when he visits the South, the racism is almost palpable. He sees it, he feels it, he hears it, and he doesn't respect it, but he could see it, like, and so a part of him, like, can understand it. But when he looks at, like, the white moderate in the North who's complicit about it, he he just doesn't understand it, why they are. And he was speaking mostly to a Christian community in that book. And so I feel like what you were saying, John, as far as hiding behind, like, that sheepish perspective of Jesus, it almost, you can feel comfortable about, like, not doing anything. But if you read the Bible, like, definitely Jesus was very controversial. He was very punk, and we talked about that, using that word, like, punk. He wasn't concerned about how he definitely was concerned about how people felt, but also he didn't care about how people felt because he wanted to be on the right side of justice. And so I think, like, when, like, I've been to a few protests, I've had these conversations with other people. um I don't want to say take the Christianity out, but what I see from a lot of Christians is they lead with it, and there's nothing bad about that. But I think you also have to, like, play to your crowd. So of course we want to put Christ in everything that we do, and then Pastor Matt has talked about that. Like, maybe if you're a teacher, maybe you lead with being a teacher first, and then you can talk about Christianity somewhere in there. So what ruffles a lot of feathers is people, like, lead with Christianity, and then people are just, like, turned off about it, or they use Christianity as, like, a tool. And I think this is right when your ministry starts. Is this is the first time where Christians like, are almost, especially with churches being closed, you have to go out and live everything that you've been reading and preaching and telling other people to do. So you have to go out and just be with the people. I'm not saying you have to go and protest, you have to do these things, but what does your ministry look like? And it doesn't, and a lot of people are like, I serve on this team, or I do this, but no, like, what does your ministry look like? Because we live it out every day. So that's the one thing that I think, like, our role as a Christian is to be ministering to people. And I think when we talk about what does ministering look like, it doesn't necessarily, you're not out on the corner saying you're going to hell if you don't stop sinning. You know, it just looks a little different. So as a Christian, I mean, we wear a lot of different hats, but right now, just put on your empathy hat, your feeling hat, your listening hat, and lead with that. And I guarantee, like, you know, opportunities to share Christ and your view on spirits being broken, and this is why things are happening. But just lead with your humanness first, um, which in turn is like still leading with the, you know, leading with Christianity, leading as a Christian, because that's, you know, our spirit that God gave us. I don't know if that makes sense, but I like, there's an example. I went to a protest in Riverside, and there was a pastor there, um, who was, and I had visited his church before. I've been to his church before, and there was just this random guy that he had his microphone and he started preaching, and then people at first were like, all right, cool, this guy's like, we're here for one cause, and then he gets into his message, and then people are like, this is not the time for your beliefs and all this. And I'm just sitting there as a Christian, you know, not really knowing what to do. I'm like, I felt like God telling me I need to say something, but this pastor was there, and I knew he's a very well respected pastor in our area. He literally goes to this guy that was preaching to everyone and told him this is not the time. And I'm thinking, like, he pastors a pretty big church, and he was just there to be a part of the protest. He wasn't, if anyone should be like preaching, it would be a pastor, right? And the guy that was preaching wasn't a pastor. So I think in that moment, that was a perfect example of what we should be doing. And it's, yeah.
No, yeah, like it's 100%. It's like Christians should be. I use the word leading loosely. Like we don't have to, like, as in not being in charge, but like Christians should be leaders in movements like this, where like you see human suffering, but the idea of like you lead by giving like a sermon or some sort of platitude is just like, it's that, I guess, like almost like shallow example of it, where it's like, I'm just gonna like say nice things and call it a day. It's like, no, like be, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
lead by being here, get in the middle of the crowd and like, you know, join in a morally upright way. Caveat.
Yeah. Oh man, that story is too on point. Honestly, it really is. We're approaching the end of the podcast, and I'm going to hit you guys with one final question. You guys have pretty much nailed it, in my opinion. But in this final question, I know there's not only one thing we could do, but if you had to say, if there's one thing each individual could consider doing that would push this forward, what would it be?
Like each individual, like by the like what could everyone do kind of universally on an individual level?
Yeah, or you could even say what they could do, what a good need would be.
I have kind of a long answer for this. All my answers.
Hit me. Oh no,
You go first.
long is fine.
All
Final
right.
question doesn't mean there's a constraint. It just means it's the
Man.
last one.
So okay, so and I'll keep saying that I'm a teacher, a fifth grade teacher. So my scope of focus is always going to be to the youth, and so the first thing that you can do, and I heard this from one of my favorite rappers. His name's Killer Mike. He's in a group called Run the Jewels. Go check him out. But he says one thing that anybody could do, but this first one is mainly to white people. So for white people, is to mentor a kid who does not look or share the same values or culture as you. So like as a white person, you can mentor a kid um, to help the cause, and what that looks like, and the reason, and there's many reasons why. But I know that there's, being a teacher, there's so many kids that don't have a stable home life, and especially because in the black community and the brown community, but especially the black community, like the fathers are either not there or not present. And I don't want to make this blanket statement, but there's a high percentage of young black boys especially that need guidance. So mentoring them doesn't mean, taking them on a shopping spree and go buying them clothes or books or things like that. But I think books are good, but sharing knowledge. And the reason why is because when we look like historically at families, there's just a wealth of knowledge that certain families have that other families don't. And I was speaking with my in-laws about that, as far as like, I never, growing up, my parents never showed me how to balance a checkbook. They never told me, you need to go to college. They never told me things that it takes to be successful, because you only know what you know. And so mentoring could be a direct uh, way to help the cause, as far as like, ensuring that the system of racism is broken down. So go, and whether it's through Boys and Girls Club, you can go to schools, go to your local elementary school and see what kind of programs are available. And if there isn't one, start one. Like, I started a group for young African American and Hispanic boys, and it's just a mentor group that I do with another dad. And it literally was grassroots. It started, and I think we had 2 kids the first year, and I think we're at 10 now, and it just keeps growing. And what we do is we share our lives, and we share knowledge of how you react to certain things. Talk about your feelings, and there's been plenty of, tears being shed in that group. So definitely, to the white community, look for young people to mentor. Another thing is to definitely read a few books, and this is for anybody. um, the the narrative of Frederick Douglass, that book changed my life. um, there's this one book that I'm reading right now that is life changing. It's by this author, sociologist. Her name is Dr. Joy DeGruy. Her last name's Degruy. It's called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome. Um, and it would take like a whole nother hour to explain that book, but just, I think it's a required read. You should read it. I don't care who you are, read that book. The book I mentioned earlier, Why We Can't Wait, by Dr. King. um, there was another book that I wanted to say. I completely forgot. Oh, Up From Slavery. It's called Up From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. That's a pretty life-changing one. And then I told you, John, about this too. Jane Elliott, she was a teacher. I don't want to give too
Oh
much,
yeah.
describe too much of it, but just type in Jane Elliott, um, and blue-eyed, brown-eyed experiment. She does this really cool experiment for a lot of like, especially my white friends, and I would say white friends and family, that ask, what can I do, or what does it feel like to be black, in America. And I think, out of all the things that I've watched or seen, this is going to be like the one thing where, after watching it'll kind of change your whole frame of how you look at things, and it'll get you as close to how black people feel in America. It won't get you there, but this is the one thing that I've seen that will get you like that close. Um,
Yeah.
and just model to your kids, like, especially if you're white, whether you're white, black, or whatever, have like, interact with people that don't agree with you. And this is aimed at Christians too, because I feel like, and we get in our little Christian bubble, and your kids see you interacting only with Christians and nobody else that disagrees, whether it's atheist, whether it's Muslim, whether it's Buddhist, because they're not going to know how to have a healthy interaction with anybody that disagrees with them. And so,
Yeah.
and that's something we should be doing. It shouldn't be something someone advising you. Like, I think God tells us to, you go out into the world and, make disciples, of the world. And so, yeah, and then just listen to more hip hop, whether you agree with whether you agree with the N word or not. That's another conversation. But, I mean, a lot of the times people love certain aspects of black culture, um,
Mhm.
but through a medium of, whether it be a TV or a nice little plexiglass. Like, you want the culture without actually having to experience it. So, my 2 best friends are Mexican. I learned a lot of Spanish that I've forgotten through them. A lot of food, but those are things that I only learned because I was in their house. Not saying you got to go and find black people to like on a field trip. We're gonna go to our black friends and family's house today, but um, really like share your life with other people because that's gonna be the biggest thing that's gonna open your eyes. And like I was saying before, like you're going to have people that challenge you that don't agree with you because if you stay in your circle, you're going to think everything is fine and everything's dandy when you need someone to point out those things. So those are like the main things I would recommend. So it's a good, I feel like a good starting point. And go to your local school again, focus on the youth and see if there's a group that is for African American parents or families or kids, and see how you could help them,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that looks like, because everyone's going to be different.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. I think those are all fantastic. Before I let you go, John, I just want to say I'm going to do my darnest to get every book that you just mentioned in the show notes if anybody wants to read those.
I'll send you a list, bro.
Yeah, please do. We'll get those in there.
Send me a list, shoot.
Yeah.
No, I would say something like very similar. My main thing is just um, in whichever medium you choose, like look into black creators or thinkers in that medium. So if you're a person that's really into philosophy, look up. I mean, for now, black people, but there's other like Asian or Middle Eastern, whatever. But like, look up, I guess, someone different within that field that's not necessarily white. This is for white people and also people of color as well. Like again, like I said earlier, when I began to do these kinds of things, like search out black creators for things that I like, I realized that while the topic may not be like about slavery or the black experience, just the amount of intersectionality they throw into their work creates this like organic or natural um, frame of mind where like you can kind of see the different perspective. So but for example, there's a podcast called Dope Labs where these two black women, they host it. They're both like, one's an engineer, one's like a bio, like they're both like PhD or a higher level degree holding women, and they kind of like they run through different aspects of life. So they analyze like cuffing season, which is like the a period of time in the year when people link up and get together romantically, and they kind of like broke that down scientifically. But just even the way they were discussing it had an amount of intersectionality to it, to where you can kind of see a different viewpoint on it, or like any of the books Alan said, or for example, comic books. I read, if you read Captain America right now, a black author named I never know how to pronounce his name, Ta-Nehisi Coates
Mm.
is writing it. He wrote a book called Between the World and Me, but like he's writing Captain America right now, and the way he's writing it is in its own way critical of the way America's set up, and he's not like making an affront to America, but even that black author is kind of injecting his own little idea into it and his own way of thinking. And so just like seeking out authors that are from a different background than you, or creators that are from a different background than you, no matter what the topic is, will really go a long way in helping you reframe your thinking to include other ways of thinking.
Absolutely, love it. It's not, yeah. I guess we can't really ever escape ourselves in a sense. You know what I mean? Like anything that we create, it's gonna have a piece of us and who we are in it. So it's perfect. John, Alan, thank you for being on the show. John, Alan, I don't know if I should ask you where we can find you on the internet because I already had a hard time finding you on the internet, but
Facebook. Well, that's the only thing I have. Facebook, or just the old fashioned. Like if people want to get in contact with me, yeah, just Facebook. I'm not gonna give my number out or anything. I'm old.
Share with the world.
That's right.
Man, there's so many things I feel like I didn't get a chance to say, but thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I almost feel, this might need to be a part 2, just because I do feel like there's so much left still to say and discuss. So we'll put that on the, we'll discuss it. We'll see what we can cook up.
We'll do it in the group chat.
That's right. John, do you want people to find you on the internet?
Sure. If you're into things I find funny, I'm on Facebook. I don't use it. John Fyne Suffor. I'm on Instagram. Almost don't use it. John Suffor. And I'm on Twitter. Again, almost don't use it. John FN.
All right. Well, thank you guys, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
That was the episode. Thank you for listening. Next week is going to be really special. We have Dr. Thomas. He's going to be talking about the civil rights movement occurring across America. He's the executive pastor at Chino Valley Community Church. He's ran the Boston Marathon 8 times and has a doctorate in leadership. It's going to be a very special conversation, a very important and necessary conversation that we all need to have, all need to listen to. That means tune in next Friday at 6 a.m. and you can listen to the podcast too. And the real reason you're still here, where do snowmen dance? The snowball, of course. All right. That's it. We'll see you next week, guys. Thank you for listening to us and allowing us into your homes, cars, headphones, wherever you're listening. Have a great day.